Yeah, so this week it's just like a normal week for me. Next week I'm gonna be out Wednesday through Friday. So I might, if we get you up to speed, there might be a few things I ask you to do remotely. So you could just come in on Monday and do other stuff from home and just do all your hours. And then you'll be back that and back. And this summer actually I'm gonna be gone for 2 weeks in July. I'm going to a conference for work in Australia actually. And so we're going to be on, I'm going to be doing actual initiatives like on line in Excel, trying to sort of work around that. But in the following, I'm just traveling. So I probably will be in charge of just like Facebook and a few other things. And some stuff doesn't really need to get delivered on, but definitely reviewing the inbox does. And a few other things. And that's the last half of July. Yeah, I decided I could go to a place where they have it. It's a really best place. And they have baby fingers, like it's like really big fingers. I know. I mean, it's like, I was like, okay, I'm going to be in Australia on my own. Like, it's a huge country, I can't do everything. What do I want to do? And then I was just like, I was made a hard landing on us. I crashed onto the building of so
yeah, so more we're supposed to look at, those assessments and then decide what to do. So she hasn't really how much.
And did you guys just do the extension tab or anything?
No. But she's gonna bring them back. We just don't know what's going on.
Because I'm thinking of just for the other role, just doing it all.
All in there.
Yeah.
Get it over with. Yeah, it makes it harder.
Oh, okay. I'm not from the Bay Area, or I've lived here for years. But like, there's still some areas I don't know very well. And it's one of them because I've never lived down there. And yeah, yeah, it's funny though. I know.
Yes. Yes, which is fine.
I can call find something right over back. I don't know if that's gonna be too bad. That's not low.
I don't think it's too loud.
Is it too loud? Can you hear me if I talk here? I mean, I can turn it up a little bit, but
Now it's, yeah.
to start with that?
Oh, I'm not starting. This is just for Q&A. And the
Oh,
Q&A is
okay.
going to be sprinkled throughout there, just
Okay.
FYI. So are these like hot, and you'll just bring them up on the board?
They're, yeah.
I don't.
You need it, you gave me it right
But
now.
you did.
Yeah.
Got it.
I need that.
Perfect.
And then once I see QA starts,
You got it.
turn them on.
Thank you. Okay.
Good, do you want me to go over there?
Yes, please. Thanks. And he's going to do potentially throughout the whole show, not just at the end.
What'd you say?
He's going to do Q&A throughout the whole thing, not just like a 5-minute.
I'll mention that to me. All right, I'll get to this side of the room.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm about to email you my fundraising event.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I'm like stressing. I don't know enough people here.
You're at Berkeley.
No, like just in general to come. I need like to fill 58 seats.
That's a lot of seats.
I know. So I'll do my best.
Let's say you get 20 from Berkeley. You get maybe a dozen friends. That's good.
Alright.
You tell me.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Cheers.
Yep. Thank you.
Hi, Douglas. Are you in charge of the streaming? No. Oh, because you
This streaming mic here?
never get a break, right?
No, I know. It's really loud.
You're live.
If you want to tell us when we should start.
Nice dress. Oh, you're welcome.
You're married.
I'm married.
He's right there.
Everyone. Thanks for coming out on such a very warm day. My name is Elise Prue. I'm the marketing director at the Greater Good Science Center, and I just wanted to say thank you so much to James and his team for inviting us
to participate this year in Staff Appreciation Week. There are other events happening this week. I saw there's a gardening thing that I'm interested in, and also food and all sorts of other events that are in an email that you should have received last week, and there will be emails going out every day this week reminding you what's coming up next. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the Greater Good Science Center. Maybe some of you already know about it. Who here has already had some experience with the Greater Good Science Center? Oh, good, like almost everybody. So we are a group here at UC Berkeley. We're nested under the Institute for Human Development in the psychology department, but we don't face the school, we face the external world. So we have an audience of people around the world. Right now we have about 3 million people every month who view some part of our content. We look at, as I said here, we're a bridge between the research community and the general public, and we keep track of the latest research on the science of emotions and social and emotional development, how we interact with each other. We look at things like gratitude, compassion, well-being, purpose. We have information on our site that simply translates the research, and we also have practical tools and tips. I've just on this slide have listed some of the platforms that we do have to offer to the public. We have a magazine. We have content up almost every day. It's Greater Good magazine, and that's another typo. I put the wrong URL. It's actually greatergood.berkeley.edu. We have Greater Good in Action, which is a compendium of practices that you can do in your normal life, ggia.berkeley.edu. We have a podcast. We have online classes. We have live events, including one that's just coming up this fall for health professionals. If anyone here is at the Tang Center, that would be for you. We also have programs for parents, for educators, and for workplaces. I encourage you all to check out our website at ggsc.berkeley.edu to find out more. And we've actually put together something special for the Cal community. Every month we have what we call a happiness calendar. Goes out in our newsletter. We have an email that goes out at the beginning of every month that just gives you tools and tips day by day. And we created one that's especially for the UC Berkeley community that's focused on workplace. There was a link to it that went out in the email that you got last week, but I'm going to ask the team at HR to send that out again, just so that you can take advantage of this, and the folks who might be watching via webcast can also take a look at it. Today we have our web editor, Jeremy Adam Smith, who's going to be talking about how you can approach the material on our site, even if you are a crank and pessimist. And he will give you a little bit more information in a second. He's an award-winning journalist and edits the web content at our magazine. Please welcome Jeremy Adam Smith.
I can do something with my phone. Hi, can you guys hear me? Is this working? Okay, great. All right, so yeah, I work at the Greater Good Science Center, and you would think, given our mission, that we would be like the happiest, most grateful, most compassionate workplace on campus. And that's actually kind of true for my coworkers. I am kind of a crank and kind of a pessimist. Whoops, we skipped ahead. And that's why I call this positive thinking for cranks and pessimists, which is basically how I've approached all of my work there for the past 10 years. Is kind of like, really pushing against it and really testing these ideas in my own life, because this is stuff that I actively resist, like every single day. And I hope those of you who are with me on that will listen and consider some of these ideas and try applying them even if they make you extra grouchy. Okay, so many of you perhaps don't self-identify as cranks and pessimists, but all of us can be cranky and pessimistic, especially in this heat. And I want to talk about what makes us cranky and pessimistic. This is a good friend of mine. It's a very baseline psychological idea called negativity bias. How many people have heard of negativity bias? All right, a fair number, but a lot of you, it appears this is a new idea. So, negativity bias is the idea that evolution has hardwired us to notice threats and dangers and all of the irritating things in life. And it's not hard to see why evolution might have done this for us. I mean, we're not facing wild animals in the dark anymore, and we can just go to a supermarket and get food, but we do walk through Berkeley streets where the drivers are terrible for the most part, and if you didn't have negativity bias, you would just be walking out into traffic and getting hit all the time. So it's natural, and it's normal, and it's necessary to have this bias towards the negative things in life. But unfortunately, for us humans, there's two basic problems. I mean, what's happening is that your attention is like a spotlight. And when you point the spotlight at one thing, it's two things that happen. Everything outside of that spotlight is thrown into darkness, so you have a little trouble seeing it, right? And if you're pointing that at the negative things, that's going to trigger the stress response. So, what is stress? Stress is for this. You're hoofing it along the savannah, and a lion jumps out and attacks you and wants to eat you, and what do you need in that moment? You need to run, right? You need to fight or run, one or the other. And so stress is it's a mental thing, but it's also a physiological thing. What's going on with the stress response is that your body is mobilizing its resources to escape or to fight. And it narrows your attention, stress. It narrows that spotlight of attention as much as possible. And it really makes you very, very action-oriented. And there's a lot of things not happening when you're stressed out. Do you need compassion when you're being attacked by a lion? No. Do you need empathy? Do you need gratitude? Do you need any of those things that tie us together to other people? No, in fact, those things are disadvantageous. When the stress response is triggered, everything in you is saying, I don't have the time for compassion. Now, that's not a problem for our friend the zebra, because our friend the zebra has a lot of fine qualities, but a big brain is not one of them. We have big brains, and we get caught in traffic as a result of our big brains. And when we get caught in traffic and we're being made late, it really stresses us out. We don't just have big memories, where we're recording past stresses and then holding them in our minds. We also have great imaginations, and it's a gift. It's a wonderful gift that we humans have. However, it can be very detrimental when you're talking about the negative things in life, the stressful things, because you're constantly replaying these bad things. You're ruminating, right? And you're constantly triggering the stress response. If you're caught in traffic, or if things aren't going so well at work, or maybe you have some young kids at home and they're like crying all the time and asking you for things and you don't have enough time for yourself, you feel like a zebra being attacked by a lion in those moments, right? And this kind of reveals a very fundamental scientific truth, a lot of which, by the way, has been pioneered here at UC Berkeley. This was a very woo-woo idea back in the 60s, right? All these guys were like meditating and smoking pot and, and saying, man, there's a mind-body connection. And some of those people got PhDs and studied it here at Cal. And, the essence of science is counting, and there's a lot you can count about that mind-body connection. And, but you don't even need a scientific study to tell you. If you take just a moment right now and you think about something stressful, let's do that just for fun, including you people watching at home. Think about something stressful and think about what happens in your body. Do what's called a body scan. That's a kind of meditation. Think about what's happening in your head. Think about what's happening in your neck. Think about what's happening in your shoulders and your stomach. If you are normal, you're going to notice a lot of tension there in all of those places. And if you turn your thoughts away from that to something good, something that makes you happy, something that makes you feel relaxed, well, you're going to relax. Your neck suddenly loosens up, your shoulders loosen up, your digestion suddenly works. You might even suddenly feel yourself hungry again, if you think about those good things. And that's the mind-body bridge. That's how it works. So, I talked about how when you're being attacked by a lion, you don't need compassion. So, there's been a lot of studies about this, about the relationship between stress and compassion. The classic one happened in the 1970s at Princeton University, and it was called the Good Samaritan experiment. So what they did was they took a bunch of seminary students who were learning how to give sermons, and they were to give a sermon on the Good Samaritan. And the experimenters made some, I'm going to actually simplify the experiment a little bit here. The experimenters made some students very late and gave other students plenty of time. That wasn't the only variable they tested, but this is the important one for this talk. And then they sent those students across campus. And as they went across campus, they came across a man who was actually a Confederate, an actor in the experiment, like slumped over and faking a heart attack. And what they found is that these students, who were seminary students, who were thinking about the beautiful spiritual things in life, often, if they were late, did not stop to help the guy. If they had plenty of time, they would stop. Only 10% of the students stopped when they were late. The students who weren't late were more than 6 times more likely to help. So this reveals kind of 2 important things. One is that stress really affects your ability to connect with other people. It also reveals, and I think this is kind of important, that we as humans are very responsive to what's happening in our environment and what goals we've been given. And this is, for those of you who are supervisors, this is a super important thing to know. You can create an environment where or you can help create an environment where there's a lot of stress, or you can take steps to reduce it a little bit. And if it's a lower stress environment, people are more likely to help each other out and to show compassion, even if it's very low level compassion. I shouldn't do this, but I actually want to show you guys a text conversation with a friend of mine from like 90 minutes ago. She's like, hey, how are you? And I say, I'm stressed. I somehow forgot I'm keynoting Staff Appreciation Week at UC Berkeley. I really did forget. I woke up this morning. I was like, yeah. And then I looked at my schedule, and I was like, holy crap. And I was like, it's okay. It's fine. I give this talk all the time. But I was thrown. And she says, yeah, good luck. Break their legs. So that's her little variation on break a leg. You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not going to take that advice. I mean, I thought this was hilarious because, if I had been like coming across campus and I saw some guy slumped over having a heart attack, it would have been like, I have to give a very important talk about kindness. You're on your own, buddy. So yeah, Good Samaritan. So this kind of raises a question, or at least it did for me, which is that does happiness depend on only seeing the good things in life? And a lot of people believe that, right? This is the rose-colored glasses philosophy. So recently, in the past couple of years, there's been a group of neuroscientists, mostly at the University of Toronto and at Princeton University, who have been studying brain response to negative and positive things. And there's one experiment in particular I want to highlight where they put participants into a brain scanner, and they showed them positive images, and they showed them negative images. So positive, presumably, was like puppies and flowers. Negative was probably stuff like war and famine and stuff like that, like really awful things. And then they measured brain response. And I'm not going to take you through the whole experiment, or experiments like this, but here's kind of the upshot. This result has been replicated across many different experiments, which is the gold standard in science. Like one study doesn't quite do it. What you need is multiple studies showing similar things. Happy people respond more strongly in their brains to positive things. And I should say that they measured like their sort of overall subjective well-being. That's what they call happiness. That's what scientists call happiness, subjective well-being, before they went into the brain scanners. So happier people respond more strongly to positive things. Their brains light up a little more brightly, so they're noticing it more. But they see the negative too. This was fascinating to me. There's no difference in brain response to negative images between the happier and the less happy people, which I thought was really interesting. However, the happier people bounced back more quickly. Like for the less happy people, they would sort of hold that negative image in their mind and kind of ruminate on it. And honestly, this is like one of my problems. This is why I'm qualified to give a talk on positive thinking for cranks and pessimists. I do that too. So the upshot of studies like this is that, it's not a matter of never seeing the bad things in life. It's a matter of making sure that you see the good things and that you savor them. And that increases your ability to be resilient when you actually do face the bad things. And this to me is the essence of positive thinking, which is a much maligned term, and I understand why. But it's really about sort of giving yourself cognitive tools to override that natural negativity bias, that natural, necessary negativity bias. Like really taking concrete steps to make sure that you are counting everything in life and not just focusing on the bad things all the time. And for some people, this is pretty easy. And for some people, it's kind of a struggle. And probably, if you're like everybody, you're going to go through phases of your life where it's kind of a struggle, and then you're going to go through phases of your life where it's kind of easier, right? We don't all hold still. And that's kind of what we do at the Greater Good Science Center. We try to give people those tools for making sure that they see the good things in life. And a lot of these tools are really based on trying to strengthen our relationships with other people. If there's one takeaway from happiness studies from the past 20 or 30 years, it's that your relationships are the most important predictor of your happiness. And some of these items, this is a graph we sort of made up that shows what we call the keys to well-being, the elements of a meaningful life, if not necessarily a happy one. And some of these are explicitly about your relationships to other people. You can see, there's forgiveness, there's empathy, there's gratitude, but there's also something like awe. And you might wonder, well, what does awe have to do with other people? And the answer is that awe is linked to well-being because it takes the focus off yourself. It feels good to go for a walk in the woods or for a hike in the mountains because for that split second, you're not thinking about yourself. You're not ruminating. You're getting a little practice in seeing yourself as being a small part of this big world, which is the beginnings of humility. And there's all kinds of good outcomes linked to humility, a sense of proportion and where you are in the scheme of things. It's when those things, it's when our sense of self gets a little bit too large that we get into trouble and start to become narcissists. But yeah, it's about strengthening relationships. So, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking this is just common sense. We don't need we hear this all the time at the Greater Good Science Center. We don't need a study to tell us that. We already know that. But the thing is, how many of you feel like you actually put these insights to work in your daily life? Now, maybe a lot of you do, but if you're normal, you probably struggle with it. And if you're not struggling with it right now, you will in the future. I can pretty much guarantee you at some point. We can sort of see this. It feels obvious. The problem is, with our big brains, it's very hard to sort of hold on to it and hold on to what's good for us. So I'm going to pause there, actually, and ask if there are any questions before I go on. And you have to, if you do ask a question, you have to wait for somebody to bring you a mic. Okay, we got two. I'm going to have two, and then I'm going to proceed.
Thanks. I was just curious, and maybe this is like not relevant, but how do you think about people who are like sensitive versus people who we all know those people that are like feel like their band of emotions is like here, and yours is like here.
Right.
Like, so you'd feel more pain and you'd feel more happy.
Yeah, you just described my partner and my stepchild. Yeah. I feel you. Yeah, their negativity bias is very well developed. I actually didn't quite hear that. Maybe you could give her the mic. Right. Right. Well, so you're asking a super complex question. And anxiety the kind of anxiety you're talking about comes in different flavors with different personalities, and I'm sort of hesitant to make any sort of grand pronouncements in this context. But, oftentimes, like people who are very anxious, oftentimes what you find is that they're smart. Like they are. They're smart. And they that means that they remember things really well, and they also have big imaginations. And the problem is that they lack that resiliency piece, and they have a lot of trouble bouncing back from encountering the negative things. And also, there is such a thing as temperamental sensitivity, right? And it's kind of rough. Like it's very hot today. Like some people really are weighed down by heat, for example. And I think your question was more about how you deal with people like that. Patience. I try to be patient. Try to focus on the positive things about them. Try to sit with them, be with them, and try to enter the space that they're in without getting completely entrained with the difficulties they're having. That's the real trick, is maintaining that little bit of distance between you and them so that you can be with them and sit with them without necessarily getting caught up in the dilemma. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but those are my thoughts. And this gentleman here had a question too.
I may have answered this question already in framing it in my head, but I'll ask it anyway.
Okay.
I oftentimes find that when you're confronted with challenges or problems in your life, I tend to ruminate on those, as you're saying here,
Yeah.
and I fall prey to this idea that, well, I need to, once I tackle this problem and I tackle this challenge, then there will be space for happiness and ease.
Right.
But that doesn't seem to be the case. So
Yeah.
how would you address that kind of catch-22?
Right. There's a researcher named Sonia Lyubomirsky who has studied this very extensively. She's at UC Riverside. I'm a little rusty on the exact research exactly, but the gist of it is that we have another kind of psychological bias that tends to be very goal-oriented. And part of what's going on in our brains is that we sort of pick a goal. Once we pick a goal, then a little bit of healthy stress is triggered, right? Because you want to pursue that goal, and you feel stress until that goal is met. The problem, and that's natural and normal, and that's going to happen. The problem is that if we're so goal-dependent all the time, then we're just never outside of the stress. Like if we allow the goals to consume our imaginations and we don't make room for other things, then it becomes very, very stressful. And it's a bias that we have. We sort of imagine that if I fall in love, or if I buy a house, or if I get that promotion, then everything will be perfect. And we sort of know that that's bullshit. There's a part of us that's well aware that that's just not true. And for some of us, it takes a lifetime to sort of really take that truth on. But I personally think that half the battle is just being aware that that is our bias, and making sure that, especially during times in your life where you're very goal-oriented, you're really taking the time to make room for other things, especially relationships. That can really suffer. If you are really hyper-focused on this kind of external goal, oftentimes what happens, and again, this is like, you don't need a study to tell you this, right? Because we all know it. When we're very, very focused on goals, we can neglect our relationships with our spouse, with our friends, and then once you meet the goal, you may look around and find out you don't have any friends. I think that it takes a long time for a lot of us to understand that. I think that's actually the what we really mean when we say midlife crisis. Is sort of looking around and realizing that we've neglected our relationships, and then changing our priorities. Okay. Okay. So I can't solve all your problems. I'm really sorry about that. So I want to provide I want to talk about three things that we at the Greater Good Science Center see as being keystone skills to well-being. And the first is mindfulness. Now, it is not my purpose here to teach you to be mindful. It's my purpose here for those of you who don't know anything about mindfulness or who resist the idea of meditating and all this, sort of woo-woo stuff, I want to encourage you to become curious about it and at least consider the idea that it might be worthwhile to cultivate mindfulness. Now, a lot of people think of mindfulness as being like this, like you put on your yoga pants and you go to the studio with a bunch of white women and you sort of put your hand over your heart and then you're like breathing, and then at more advanced levels of mindfulness, like there's like a beautiful sky, and you're all alone and with your fingers like this, and then at really advanced levels of mindfulness you actually start levitating. And I want to encourage you to think about mindfulness much more concretely than that. So what is mindfulness actually? Like when you break it down scientifically, it's paying attention to what's happening while it's happening on purpose without judgment, which is super duper hard to do. And just to sort of go back for a moment, paying attention to what's happening. This goes back to what I was saying about there being a mind-body bridge, and attention is that bridge. So often when we're like goal-oriented and we're like working really hard, we're really, like a symptom of that is that the spotlight is just all over the place, right? It can actually reduce our ability to effectively identify threats, as well as the good things. And mindfulness is really about sort of getting control of that spotlight, making sure it's pointing in the directions you need it to point in that moment. Okay, so that's one idea. While it's happening, so this means like just sort of looking at what's in front of you and quieting the memory with your big brain and quieting the imagination. Memory is good. Imagination is good. We need those things. It makes us special. But there's a lot to be said for disciplining your mind so you're not constantly trapped in memory or constantly trapped in your imagination. Just sitting there with what's happening while it's happening. On purpose. So this is about intention. If you go into a stressful meeting at work, or if you're talking with your spouse about a difficult subject, it pays to set an intention, to set a conscious intention, to be kind, for example. Your intentions may vary. But that intentionality is so important. And when you think about it, I don't know about you, but oftentimes we really kind of live our lives without any intention. We're just kind of reacting. We're not really thinking about, what am I trying to do right now? What kind of outcome do I want? What am I working for? Towards what end should all my resources be mobilized? And this is a little bit different from what he's talking about with goals. This is really about like going into the moment and thinking about what you want in that moment. And then finally, without judgment. So again, this is a problem for me as a crank and a pessimist, is I'm constantly judging myself and judging my thoughts and putting them into good buckets and bad buckets. And mindfulness is really about not doing that. It's about sort of saying, oh, I feel bad right now. I feel bad right now. I just feel bad. It's normal. Everybody feels bad sometimes, and that's okay. Not judging it, reserving that judgment. So, there's a lot of mindfulness in popular culture. Yoda basically preaches mindfulness to Luke, over the course of the original 3 Star Wars movies. And I can't teach you to be mindful right now, but what I do want to submit is the idea that mindfulness is worth cultivating. And people cultivate it in different ways. They sort of come at it with different strengths and weaknesses, and it's worth cultivating. And if there are any questions about mindfulness, I will definitely take them. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Way back there. I'm about to kill my water bottle.
So I have one. Whenever I'm stuck in traffic and I'm driving, I get incredibly anxious, and I'm hyper aware of what's going on, but I'm also trying to be like, should I take this exit? Should I get in that lane, this lane? But when I'm on like BART and there's a 20-minute delay, I kind of just surrender and watch a movie or whatever.
Right.
And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like mindfulness can be helpful, but distraction can also be helpful. But I'm not sure if it's about like control. Like
you
if
can
I
always turn on
if
NPR
I feel like
or
I
something.
could make a change, therefore I need to do
thank you.
something about that. So I'm just wondering how that might play into this.
You know, my instinct is to say that the problem there is that you actually have more control when you're in your individual car with your hands on the wheel. And it's that little edge of control that makes you that much more anxious. And that, you know, and also, as you said, like your mind is thinking about, you know, like when you're driving, you're constantly trying to anticipate both threats because of negativity bias, which is wonderful. Otherwise, we'd all kill each other all the time. But also just getting where you're going, right? And whereas on BART, you're just kind of helpless, which can trigger stress. I mean, that can really stress out some people, but it sounds like you sort of go into it with the right mindset, which is that I'll get there when I get there. It's not under my control right now. There's nothing I can do. So good for you. I don't think everybody's like that. I think some people get really stressed out riding public transit. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so your second thing involves being kind to yourself and others. So I'm using this picture of baboons because there's been a lot of studies about kindness in baboons. Baboons are incredibly vicious with each other, but it's very interesting. Even baboons will be kind to each other in, you know, very specific circumstances. Some of them are not replicable with humans. Like, for example, they found that if the males all die out because of a disease, the baboon troop actually becomes a lot kinder. Uh-oh. They're baboons, you know, I mean, what are you going to do? Okay, so we're humans. We're not baboons. And we've got those big brains. So take just a moment to close your eyes and just, like for real, you don't have to do this, but try it out. Remember a time that you spent money on yourself. It could be for the bagel this morning. It could be for a bicycle that you bought over the weekend. I bought my kid a bicycle over the weekend. Think about that. Now, think about a time you spent money on somebody else for a present or just doing them a favor. And now, think about which makes you happier. Science predicts that it was spending money on somebody else that made you slightly happier, that maybe gave you that warm glow. And you should listen to that feeling because kindness is linked to a lot of really great outcomes, like measurable outcomes for humans. I mean, some of them are kind of unexpected and funny, like just making more money on average. But there's one I want to highlight here, which is that kindness affects your chances of reproductive success. So, you know, I think a lot of us sort of imagine that beauty is the most important for finding a mate. And it is true that beauty is a factor, as you can see from this graph from this one study. I mean, I could have used any number of studies to illustrate this point. This is another one of those results that keeps getting replicated. Financial prospects, you know, definitely that sort of cognitive, practical brain takes over, and you're like, okay, I don't want to like hook up with somebody who's got no prospects. But kindness is the most important factor. This turns up in survey after survey, study after study. Like it's what people are looking for in a mate. And the reason why I'm highlighting this particular result is that this is the essence of natural selection. This is evolution at work. This is who gets to pass on their genes. You know, in many, many, many ways, we've sort of bred ourselves for kindness. And you may think of humans as being unkind, but again, take a moment and count the number of kindnesses that you've experienced just today. Make yourself see them, and you will see kindness is actually pretty ubiquitous. Okay, so why are we unkind? I actually already talked about this. Stress can damage our ability to connect with each other. You know, we can be really unkind if we're really stressed out. I took my son, I bought my son a bicycle, and it was used, and we had to like repair some things, and it was super hot yesterday, and we were in a garage, and it was super hot in the garage, and my son, because he's 14, wasn't doing everything perfectly, and I was getting really mad at him. Because I was stressed. It was hot, and I didn't actually know what I was doing either with the bicycle, and you know, it was a little bit stressful, and this morning I apologized to him, because I was like, Lico, I'm really sorry, I snapped at you. So we're often unkind, and we're often unkind specifically because we're stressed. But the thing is, being kind to the people we're irritated with actually makes us feel better. And oftentimes the person we're irritated with the most is ourselves. And so I want to talk about, actually I'm starting to run out of time. I haven't even talked about gratitude, and it's Staff Appreciation Week. I just want to leave you with this idea. Try to be kind to yourself. This is an idea called self-compassion. And it is this very simple idea. It's a very simple but powerful idea. If a friend comes to you and the friend is screwed up, like actually really made a mistake, messed up, and they're beating up on themselves, do you tell them, you're right, you're a really terrible person, you're totally incompetent, you should quit that job and live on the streets? No, you don't. But many of us say those things to ourselves all the time. We're constantly beating up on ourselves. Self-compassion is the very simple idea that you should talk to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend. Consider it. I think a lot of people, once they hear this idea, it's kind of revolutionary. It's like, really? I can talk to myself in a way that's kind? I hadn't considered that because I wasn't raised that way oftentimes. Oftentimes when you scratch a lack of kindness to oneself, you find family of origin issues that we won't go into here. Okay, other self-kindness exercises. Talk to yourself in the third person. This is that little bit of distance. It pays to establish a little bit of distance from other people when they're in distress, but it also pays to establish some distance from yourself. And talking to yourself in the third person, as weird as that is, can actually help you gain perspective on it and see yourself as being a kind of stranger, right? And if you see yourself as a kind of stranger, then you can be, maybe you might feel more able to be compassionate towards that stranger. A little trick, if you feel yourself suffering, just stop and say, this is a moment of suffering. Just admit it to yourself. Admit it. You're suffering. And suffering is something all of us go through. Just admit it. And yes, some of you are laughing at my little joke in here. I am wearing pants. You can't really see it on the podium. Okay. So I don't think I have a lot of time. Am I supposed to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so? 12:55. Okay, 12:55. All right, let's talk a little bit about gratitude because it's Staff Appreciation Weeks. So, what's a thank you? It's an affirmation that there are good things in the world. It's an affirmation of relationships with other people, maybe with nature, maybe with God, if you're of that mindset. It's a way of expressing power as well, which is why we often withhold gratitude in situations where there's a power imbalance of some kind. There was a 2013 survey that we were actually peripherally involved with that found basically that people were least likely to express gratitude at work. Is anybody surprised at this? If you're surprised, throw up your arms and say, no way, dude. No, nobody's surprised. Because why should I thank you for doing your job, right? We Americans say that all the time. It's part of our vocabulary. And people also worried that expressing gratitude would lead other people to take advantage of them, which is odd, because everybody at the same time said that gratitude can really make a huge difference at work, that it really meant a lot to them to be thanked, and it also meant a lot to them to thank other people. It was something that really felt good, and yet they were sort of suppressing that natural feeling because there was something in the work environment that discouraged it. So, we go to work to get paid, right? Everybody here, I assume you're all staff, we all get a salary. That matters. It matters how much money we make. It matters to our well-being. It matters when there is a power inequality and it leads some people to be paid a lot more than others. All of those things matter. But that's not the only motivation we bring to work, and everybody knows this. We also work for connection to others. We work for a sense of meaning and a sense of mission. Many people here, I'm sure, feel a very strong sense of mission when they go to work in the morning. They work for a sense of efficacy, for a sense that they're effective. That is very important to us as humans. And, you know, and we work because this is the way that we sort of get through life. I mean, you think about an institution like the university. You know, what is this institution about exactly? You know, it's about educating the next generation, which is a very profound thing. And it's also about, you know, preserving learning and culture. And it's about conducting research so that we can understand ourselves better, so that we can understand history better, so that we can understand how nature works. And, you know, when we sort of train young people in those tasks and learning to understand. And that's a really big, important mission. And it's very easy when you're like sitting there in a boring staff meeting, you know, talking about the budget, to forget that. But it's good to be reminded. You know, it's good to be reminded. And it's also good to sort of acknowledge that there's more to what we're doing than just that paycheck, that there's a lot of other things going on. And to, you know, thank the people that we work with and make sure that they understand that we really value them. So what does a grateful workplace look like? It's low stress. I've already talked about that. There's a relatively high level of equality. Not perfect equality. We're not talking about communism here. But, you know, sort of people feel like they're in the same boat. And there's opportunities for contributing to the greater good. There's some sense that there's something at stake that's bigger than just a paycheck. This is very, very, very important psychological motivation that we all have. So how does it cultivate gratitude at work? This is based, I'm sort of synthesizing a lot of studies here, including some studies we've done at the Greater Good Science Center. You know, start at the top. You know, we humans are very responsive to what people in authority do and say. It's very important for leaders in the workplace to express gratitude because that makes it feel safe. It makes it feel safe. People at the top should thank the people at the bottom. You know, like here at the university, the quarterbacks, the glamour employees are the faculty. And we often sort of forget that the university would completely fall apart without the janitors and the custodial staff and the physical plant people and all of those folks. And maybe some of you do that work. You know, everybody sort of contributes. And it's very important, you know, to make sure that everybody understands that everybody sort of plays a role in this institution. Aim for quality, not quantity. Just saying thank you and being vague about it is not helpful. You know, you actually have to be specific about what it is you're grateful for. I think of it as being like a writing exercise. Good writing thrives on specificity, and it's like that. You know, it really helps to be very, very specific. You know, I really, you know, thank you for the way that, you know, you're always trying to be very positive in staff meetings and get us all to focus on solutions. That's like really specific. If you just say thank you for just being you, that's a little empty. Okay, provide many opportunities for gratitude. I think it's good to maybe create a little moment in the staff meetings where you open up the possibility for people expressing gratitude to each other in public. You can't make it compulsory. You can't force people to do it because that will just make them angry. But if you give people the opportunity, oftentimes they will take it. It's just that, and if they don't, it's because they just don't feel like there's space for it. So you create that space. And, you know, also another characteristic of good workplaces is that after a crisis of some kind, and crises can take many different forms, it really pays to sort of take a moment and try to be grateful for what went right, you know, what people did in the face of that crisis. Yeah, there's a lot of different things to be grateful for after a crisis. And I'm going to stop there because it is now 12:50, and I'm going to ask if there are any other questions before we conclude.
Thank you. Well, this is somewhat a joke, but somewhat serious. When I was heading over here, I was wondering, as a Jew, whether the room would be full of other Jewish people. But I was wondering whether the research shows different cultural differences, membership in different marginalized groups, whether that affects resilience and baseline happiness and ability to bounce back and so forth?
I hesitate to answer that question because my knowledge is really thin. It's something we publish articles on all the time. In fact, my colleague Kira Newman right now is writing an article about cultural differences in gratitude. And it's really fascinating because, like, people vary from culture to culture in what they're grateful for and who they're grateful to. And it really reveals a lot about that culture. So I guess maybe the short answer is yes, definitely. There are huge cultural differences. Culture really shapes how we, what it is we notice and who we notice and how we, see our relationships to other people. Culture, I think, can be tremendously destructive. I think there are some destructive aspects of American culture in terms of our personal relationships. But yeah, I don't have enough knowledge to really give a great answer for to that question.
Just to follow on to that, in terms of this negativity bias, have there been studies just gender differences in general?
For negativity bias specifically, I don't know of one. That's actually an interesting question. I'm going to look at that when I get back to the office. I will say that there are a huge number of gender differences when it comes to a lot of the qualities that I was highlighting on this slide. Oh, there we are. Women, for example, gratitude. Women tend to be more grateful than men as a group. Women tend to be more forgiving than men as a group. Women in general are a lot more pro-social than men are. And I see a lot of heads nodding, including some male heads. So I don't think this is really that surprising. And it's kind of a huge issue, I think, for our culture. Yes? I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. My bias on that in general is that it's always the interaction between the two. There's not really nature, there's not really nurture, there's just kind of the interaction between nature and nurture going back and forth. And I personally don't, unfortunately the problem with talking about pro-sociality, for example, in the context of gender is that, we slide way too easily into this idea that men should be that way. Like if they already incline towards a certain amount of anti-sociality, then boys will be boys, right? And it's just ordained. And that women are, naturally sort of forgiving and grateful and all of that stuff. And, I really think that's the wrong way to look at it. Because men, for example, are forgiving and are grateful. And what happens in our culture and the lessons that we're taught as we're growing up matters a great deal for how that gratitude and that forgiveness are expressed and who expresses it and who it gets expressed to and all of that stuff. So, until we live in sort of a perfectly gender equal society, we're never really going to know, the degree to which culture and economy and other factors shapes our predilections, based on where we're coming from. All we can do is sort of try to do our best. I don't think I get a pass as a man, to be less pro-social. I think if I need to work, if I have to work harder at it, then so be it. I just have to work harder at it. And maybe nature has something to do with that. Maybe there's some DNA. There's some interesting studies, for example, showing that testosterone makes your face more rigid, which means you're less expressive. And that actually can hurt communication. But it doesn't mean that there aren't emotions in there. It just means they're expressed differently. And I think that, expressing emotion is a skill that can be developed by both men and women. And women struggle with it too. There are we're talking about gender, but there's big differences among women and huge differences among men. Men are actually much more different from each other than women are. Like when you measure these different qualities, like there's groups of men who are very pro-social, and there's groups of men who really struggle with a lot of that. And I have a feeling culture is really important for that, but who knows? We can't know. Not yet. Okay, I think we're at time. Thank you. That was a weird note to end on.
Well, so what I heard you tell us today was to be mindful, be kind to ourselves and to others, and to say thank you. So first, thank you, Jeremy, for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for the Greater Good Science Center for providing us with such an amazing resource right here on campus that we can all reach out to and learn from. The work you all do is incredible. So thank you so much for doing that for us every day. And then to those of you in the room and those of you watching on the live stream and watching later, thank you from the team at Central HR for all that you do to make the Berkeley community such an amazing, wonderful place. Thanks, James, for our Employee Experience Lead for arranging Staff Appreciation Week. We are in Summer Staff Appreciation Week right now. Thank you for the team for helping to make this happen. Douglas, Maddie, Chris up in the booth, thank you all for everything that you do. And we hope that you will join us for some of the other activities we have this week. But remember the keynotes and the milestones that we talked about here today. Be mindful, be kind, say thank you. When you say be kind to yourself as much as you're kind to others. And that's what really Staff Appreciation Week and all the work that we're doing here is all about. So thank you so much for your attention. And I think we'll be around a little bit to answer any questions that might be lingering. But thanks so much.